I'm Orkhan Amashov. You're watching Caucasus Now. Azerbaijan and Armenia have reached a qualitatively new level in peace negotiations. Although the text of a draft peace agreement is ready, its imminent signing is not a foregone conclusion as yet, for some stumbling blocks apparently continue to remain. What are those prerequisites and how surmountable are they? And what is the true scope of Azerbaijani-Armenian peace dynamics? And let us try to understand.
On the 13th of March, Azerbaijani and Armenian officials confirmed the completion of the work on the text of a draft peace agreement, officially known as the Agreement on Peace and Interstate Normalization. This came after two unresolved provisions, as to which Baku and Yerevan remained at loggerheads for some time, had finally been agreed upon. After 30 years of struggle, the peace is now closer than ever, but there are barriers to cross, obstacles to overcome, and steps to be taken so that the two nations could finally look into each other's faces without holding an automatic rifle for the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union. However, the timeline for signing the deal and making progress towards full normalization remains deeply uncertain, as a prerequisite for its signature is a change to Armenia's constitution, which is said make indirect but clearly identifiable claims to Azerbaijan's Karabakh region. In Yerevan's view, this prerequisite is largely superfluous and could be dispensed with for the purpose of swift formalization of the document agreed upon. Baku has also been very clear that the dissolution of the OSCE Minsk group, once a mediator between the two countries, is another prerequisite to be fulfilled prior to the signing of the agreement, with Yerevan now acquiescing with this, albeit with some reservations. In June 2024, during a phone conversation with former US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, President Aliyev reiterated that the dysfunctional OSCE Minsk group and all its associated institutions must be permanently disbanded. It is very clear that meeting those demands could take some time, given that amending or changing the Armenian constitution requires a referendum to be held, which is scheduled for 2026. It is not just a protocol referendum, but is seen as a guarantee for Azerbaijan that the peace agreement would be cemented, leaving no space for double entendre and future misunderstanding, serving as a measure ensuring long-term peace. Armenia appears to beg to differ, pushing for swift signing without addressing Baku's principal concern. The conclusion of the negotiations on the text of a draft agreement were enthusiastically met by the international community. The European Union, the US and other key external players welcomed the announcements made by Armenia and Azerbaijan. US National Security Advisor Michael Waltz has called for the swift completion of the Armenia-Azerbaijan normalization deal. Waltz said he had spoken with Hikmet Hajiev, assistant to Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev. At the beginning of March 2025, the special envoy of US President Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff, arrived in the capital of Azerbaijan. According to some analysts, this diplomatic move could be construed as part of a coordinated strategy potentially involving Israel, the US, and Azerbaijan. But still, there are some major issues. The two countries' 1,000-kilometer shared border is closed and heavily militarized, with only 12.7 kilometers section of it having been delimited and demarcated. And opening of transport communications is a crucial point for the peaceful coexistence of these two countries and comprehensive normalization. At the same time, despite the announcement of progress, Azerbaijan accused Armenia of multiple ceasefire violations along the border over the past weekend and during the following days, with Armenia denying the claims. The question is, what is next?
And today I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted to be joined by Arek Kochinyan, President of the Research Center on Security Policy, Yerevan, Armenia, and Ahmed Alili, Director of the Caucasus Policy Analysis Center, Baku, Azerbaijan. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Arek, my first question is going to be addressed to you. Let us focus on what has been recently attained, namely Azerbaijan and Armenia have agreed on the two provisions of the peace agreement. What is your general evaluation of the current juncture?
So for a couple of months already, The peace negotiations were moving on a circle with the it was an electronic negotiations. It was email diplomatic negotiations, and for a couple of months already, the sides were sending each other the same drafts, with just erasing each other's suggestions, each other's comments. And it became a circle, it became a closed circle. So at one point, the government of Armenia decided to break the circle, to just unilaterally agree on the Azerbaijani reading of the last remaining two articles of the peace treaty, namely the presence of the third forces on the border and also the international court cases taken by both countries against each other, and also the diplomatic warfare, continuation of the diplomatic warfare. So Armenian side just decided to agree with those two last remaining articles, to the Azerbaijani reading of those two last remaining articles, and prepare the agreement for the signature.
Yes, indeed. And do you think that any particular significance should be attached to the current juncture, bearing in mind it's March 2025, Trump has been re-elected, international atmosphere has changed. Do you see any significance particularly related to the general international landscape? Or do you think it's purely bilateral issue involving Azerbaijan and Armenia?
I mean, Baku, I think Yerevan and Baku would like it to be purely bilateral, but unfortunately nothing is bilateral in this world. Definitely the international relations and the overall crisis, the multi-layer crisis, we can call it that way, in the world is creating problems. But at the same time, it's also creating opportunities. I would say that generally the West, I'm not even sure that we can still call it a collective West because of the tensions between the US and the EU, but generally the West, and that, by the way, includes also Turkey, is very much interested in the normalization between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The only country that is, in my opinion, was and always will be against the full normalization between Armenia and Azerbaijan is Russia. But Russia is currently occupied with its aggressive war against Ukraine. Yes, it seems like that in the nearest future the situation might change, but that's still the situation. And Russia right now doesn't have the full the traditional, let's say, political energy and the political capital in South Caucasus. So definitely on one side there are challenges on the general landscape of international relations, both for Yerevan and for Baku. But also I would say that right now is a very unique historical momentum where on one side the international landscape is pushing the sides towards the peace treaty, and also the process itself have came to a very logical conclusion, and and the treaty itself is ready to sign. I would say that it's to some extent it's a crime against history and to both nations to lose the moment that we have right now and not to sign the peace treaty.
Ahmad, Arik believes that we have to seize a moment. Azerbaijan and Armenia have to seize a moment. It's the right time, and actually Arik has described this the final stage of the negotiation, the fact that Azerbaijan and Armenia have finally agreed on those two previously unresolved provisions, namely related to the non-deployment of third-party force along the conditional border and the mutual withdrawal of international legal cases, as a concession on the Armenian side, as a unilateral concession. What is your reading of what has happened just recently?
Yeah, I agree that it's a great moment. It's a significant moment that Armenia and Azerbaijan could agree on the text of the peace deal. But frankly speaking, I would love to see this agreement to be in November, right? In November 2024. That was a historical moment. And I believe that Armenian delegation visiting Baku in 2024, that would be quite a great achievement. And I believe that we could move and make the process much more productive in this regard. But we missed that opportunity, but it's another opportunity. Now Baku has developed certain skepticism toward Armenian decision-making process. President Aliyev openly states that. President Aliyev, he specifically mentioned that it's also about the current government in Armenia in one of his last speeches, especially during the Baku Global Forum. And so that's why I believe that Baku and Yerevan, they should be talking to each other even in more sincere manner. Just there are certain issues that Baku feels that Yerevan could have done it much earlier. The things coming now, not in November 2024, but in March 2020, but in March of 2025, it creates a lot of misunderstanding, and like I would say that Baku's position is shaped by numerous acts. It creates a certain misunderstanding, and the Baku's position is shaped by numerous factors. And I believe that in this context, we have to take all of those factors into account.
Arek, we just talked about the timing earlier. I mean, last year, I remember President Aliyev and also Prime Minister Pashinyan say that bulk of the work on the peace agreement had been finalized, that only final touches need to be done. So we've seen the intensity over the past few months, probably, I imagine, during the first few months of this year, probably last December. What was the reason behind this intensification? I believe I watched your interview you gave very recently. You said that by unilaterally agreeing to Azerbaijan's demands regarding those two provisions, Armenia wanted to show its peaceful intentions and also make it very clear that Azerbaijan is not interested in peace. I think that you said something along those lines very recently. Could you elaborate on that point, please?
Sure. De facto, we have a situation when Armenia basically agreed to the text of the peace treaty suggested by Azerbaijan and is ready to sign that peace treaty, while Azerbaijan is right now the country that doesn't want to sign the peace treaty suggested by itself, by Azerbaijan. Now, that's a very unfortunate situation because I don't think that the general aim of Armenia is to show to the world how unconstructive Azerbaijan is. The general aim is actually to sign the peace treaty. But since we have the situation when regardless of every single concession made by Armenia, Azerbaijan is still not ready to sign the peace treaty, it is what it is.
Okay, Ahmad, there seems to be a sense amongst Armenian analysts that Azerbaijan's demand regarding Armenian constitution, apart from being unnecessary, is a kind of a new requirement which emerged after the finalization of the work on the text of a draft agreement. I mean, Azerbaijan has made it very clear from the very beginning that with that preamble remaining there, no peace deal would be viable. So it's not a new requirement. What is your sense of what is going on there between Baku and Yerevan?
None of those requirements are new ones. Like, they were out there for some time. And I would say that this change of constitution that is not coming from Azerbaijan, like that, it's not Azerbaijan's thinking, it's Armenians thinking. The thing is, prior to the 2020, it was Armenian expert community representatives, Armenian decision makers who would refer to Armenian constitution and say that Armenia cannot sign a peace deal with Azerbaijan. Armenia cannot recognize Azerbaijan's territorial integrity. Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. Armenian constitution prohibits it. So that was the argument from our Armenian peers for a long time. So that is why this requirement, this precondition comes from Armenian thinking. That's not Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan just reminds Armenia that there used to be this kind of preconditions. So Azerbaijan would love to see fixing of those conditions. But at the same time, I believe that the quite important issue here is that Armenia reading the text of the three-part statement a bit differently. That creates a lot of confusion in Baku. The thing is, Azerbaijan and Armenia signed certain documents in the past, and you would see that Baku and Yerevan, they are reading these documents completely in a different way. So one of those examples is the 9th article of the three-part statement, and then now Armenia sees the monitoring mechanisms, the conditions of implementation of this article in a totally different way than Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan right now wants to make sure that there is a no different reading about the peace deal, about the document that can be signed. So that's why those articles, those texts in the constitution of Armenia, where like the Azerbaijan feels that in the future somebody in Armenia might say that it was against constitution or that was a wrong decision back then. Azerbaijan just wants to eliminate all the ambiguity,
yes,
all the possible ambiguities in the future. So that is why, and again, the ninth article of the two-party statement and how Armenia and Azerbaijan are saying in this document differently is a perfect example of why Azerbaijan is insistent that this part of the constitution should be changed.
Indeed, yeah. Parties may interpret different provisions of a self-same argument, self-same agreement in a different way. I will come to Article 9 a bit later when we'll move into the subject of the opening of communications. Arek, it seems that what Azerbaijan refers to as a constitutional obstacle to peace from Azerbaijan's perspective is absolutely central to the current situation. And of course, the question of mutual trust, or rather, question of the absence of mutual trust is key here. We all, I suppose, understand this. And I heard many Azerbaijani analysts saying that let Armenia have a proper referendum in order for Azerbaijan as a country fully understand that Armenia as a nation, not only in the person of the current prime minister or government led by the prime minister, has absolutely no territorial claim towards Azerbaijan. So that will serve the purpose of crystal clear realization that everything is okay there. What are your thoughts about this sensibility which seems to pervade in this country?
First of all, regarding whether it's a new requirement or no, yeah. Yes, it was on the public discourse of Azerbaijani government, political leaders and experts for quite a time, but not everything that is in the public discourse of Azerbaijani political elite is a part of the negotiations. And the constitution topic itself became a part of the public discourse only after 2023, when Nagorno-Karabakh was basically de-Armenized, let us put it softly. So prior to the end of the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic and to the de-Armenification, let's say, of the Nagorno-Karabakh, there was no public sentiment about the constitution. It became an additional demand only after. That's first. Second, again, not everything that is in the public sphere is part of the negotiation. I mean, during the last 2 weeks, I've heard phrases like demilitarization of Armenia, phrases like we should return the weapon we bought from France and from India. We should destroy the fortifications on the border. All of this I've heard either from the president of Azerbaijan or from his ministers. Now, is this an official demand of Azerbaijan or not? Or it's a public discourse, it's a political conversation? The constitution conversation never was discussed in the official peace treaty. If it was so important for Azerbaijan, by the way, combined with the Minsk group, why it was never a part of the peace treaty itself? Why was it a body? It was not inside of the body of the peace treaty for the sides to agree on it. One small remark about the OSCE Minsk group. I don't think that there is any disagreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan on this point, because Armenia officially announced that it's ready to the dissolution of the Minsk group whenever the date and the place of the peace treaty of the signing of the peace treaty will be known. We can basically sign two agreements at one place, one about the peace treaty, second one about the dissolution of the Minsk group. So on the Armenian side, there is no contradiction to the idea that the Minsk group should be dissolved. Two more additional points about, because it was aired already, the November 9 agreement, and that in Azerbaijan there is a belief that on Armenian side there is a misreading of the Article 9. Two comments there, the November 9 declaration is not a restaurant menu where you can enter and pick one point or one article that you like. That doesn't work like that. If we're referring to the November 9 announcement, there is a quite bunch of articles that we should also talk about, and majority of it is about Nagorno-Karabakh. It's about the Lachin corridor and the right of the connection between Armenia and the Nagorno-Karabakh, and the security of the population of the Nagorno-Karabakh, the Armenian population, which is not there anymore. So the tactic to just pick one article from that announcement and say, you know, you didn't fulfill this article, that's why we don't trust you. I mean, Armenia can do the reciprocity with much bigger amount of articles. And lastly, to the 9th article of the November 9 announcement, the word unimputed doesn't have a universal reading. And even if there is, let's say, a reading of the majority, it's definitely not aligned with the reading that experts or politicians have in Azerbaijan, that you just sit in your car, you pass through the Armenian territory without zero control and without stopping anywhere. That's not the meaning of the word unimputed anywhere in the world. The regime that Azerbaijan is interested in doesn't exist anywhere in the world. And obviously Armenia won't be able to agree to that, even if that's the last stumbling point on the peace, which is not, because as probably it is well known that there are three separate directions of negotiation. One is the peace treaty, second one are the communications, and the third one is the delimitation demarcation. Those three processes are happening more or less independently from each other.
Yes. Arek, you explained, you expanded on a number of issues. You expanded on Azerbaijani demand regarding the Armenian constitution. You expanded on the Article 9. You reflected on what you described as Azerbaijan's cherry-picking approach to the 10 November declaration. You said that there are some other provisions which have been forgotten about. We will discuss all of them, of course. Ahmed will have an opportunity to react to all of those points. But just to make sure we adopt this incremental approach and focus on one thing at a time. Ahmed, Armenia side is saying, and Arek is saying, not Armenian side official, of course, Arek as an independent political analyst is saying that if this constitutional issue is such an important moment for Azerbaijan, why it is not actually in the text of the peace treaty, which has been already finalized. I believe Armenian side back in 2024 was saying that it's our internal issue, it cannot be part of the constitution, but I remember as early as late 2023, Azerbaijani officials were saying that without Armenia changing its constitution, adopting a new one, which would not entail any territorial pretension towards Azerbaijan, that no peace treaty would be viable. I remember that, but we're talking about this constitutional obstacle emerging as a requirement, as a prerequisite. So could you reflect on that element first, and then we will move on to other realms?
Sure, like that, like certain issues are definitely on a public discourse, and that them being reflected on official peace process at track 1 level. That's another issue, like that why certain issues emerged at some point and the other issues emerged later. I believe that's a very natural evolution of the process. If you remember, at the beginning there were only 6 proposals made by Azerbaijan. So the peace deal initiated by Azerbaijan at the beginning had only 6 articles, which later evolved, and then at some point I heard that there is a 13 and then 15, and then later we heard that it's 17. So I believe that at some point, most probably this issue also supposed to be part of the peace deal, but Armenia and Azerbaijan not reaching conclusion on this issue. That kind of like that makes it not part of the peace deal also. So this is, I would say that those issues that were added in the later phases, this could be one of those issues. But since Baku and Yerevan could not agree on that, so that's reviewed as a separate issue. I can tell you like that there were quite many other issues like that were kept to the future. For example, Zangezur Southern Corridor, as is referred in Armenia. So these issues were of the text of the peace deal, right? So it's a very dynamic process. The process is alive. And the other issue is, Arek was referring that the three-part statement is not a menu where you can walk in and pick the ones that you want. And the thing is, all of those points in three-part statement were addressed based on the geopolitical and regional context of that time. For example, I would say that the very first request to change the agreed article came from Armenia. When Armenia could not withdraw from Kalbajar on time, then Armenia asked for additional time, and Azerbaijan back then granted. So the very first change to that peace deal, to that document, three-part statement, came from Armenia right after 5 days or 10 days signing of that deal. Then each of those articles, Lachin corridor issues, Zengezur, all of them, they were addressed at some time, and then the context changed, and by changing context, you would see that the approach to these issues has changed also. So now, if Armenia sees that the 9th article should be changed also, so it would be a nice way to just declare that this is not how Armenia would, and officially withdraw that. So not to address the issues publicly, but just take a step and withdraw from the tripartite statements, because according to Armenia, all of those other articles have been changed. Why this article should not be changed? So the nice way would be Armenia just simply withdrawing from the tripartite statement, but it has, of course, like it has other consequences, but that's another issue. So that is why I believe that right now we are taking into account the geopolitical context. Both Baku and Yerevan, they are taking into account the geopolitical context, and they are making their decisions according to those issues. So I believe I could address all of those raised issues.
By the way, we'll come back to the point about regional communications, about Article 9, maybe about the new bilateral arrangement between Azerbaijan and Armenia to sort out that issue regarding the communications. Arik, I would like to ask one question about this document, which is officially known as Agreement on Peace and Interstate Normalization. How comprehensive is this document? I remember last year, August, September, Azerbaijani analysts were discussing the nature, scope, the legally binding, prospective legally binding nature of the document. Some people were saying that it will be just a normal, normalization document, collection of principles. Some were saying that it would be a proper peace treaty, which will need to be ratified. Now we understand we're talking about a peace treaty, and we have the title. But how comprehensive is this document, you think? Because those analysts that I've spoken to, they have some vague idea about its scope. We know about the last unresolved 2 provisions, but we don't have a sort of a clear picture of the substance entailed therein. What is the feeling about it in Yerevan, Armenia?
So, first of all, the name of the agreement, as much as I know, is Agreement on Establishment of Peace and Interstate Relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
To my understanding, it's a classical example of a peace treaty, peace agreement signed and with the need of ratification later between the countries. So it's a very solid document. At different times, both from Armenia and from Azerbaijan, there were different public discourse about the document, but the latest one that I've heard from Azerbaijan, if I'm not mistaken, was President Aliyev's statement that we want a treaty that is comprehensive, that is big, and that doesn't have any open questions left behind. So if this is the text agreed by the sides, and this was basically the text suggested by Azerbaijan, I assume that it meets all the requirements at that point raised by the president of Azerbaijan, meaning that it's a text that answers all the questions. To my best knowledge, one of the most important parts of the agreement is the mutual recognition of each other's independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the principle of not intervention into each other's internal affairs. This is the biggest and the most important part, in my opinion, of the document, which, if combined with the charter of the delimitation and demarcation, which refers to the Alma-Ata Declaration, also answers the question in which borders, in which specific maps do the country recognize each other's territorial integrity.
But there's no provision there. Sorry, Arik, there is no provision there about the opening of communications, because as we know, that particular provision was taken out of the draft text back in August 2024, correct?
Yes. As I said, the communication, whole of the communication conversation is outside of the peace treaty. It's a different track. By the way, since we opened the topic on that one, on November, I believe, Armenia sent specific suggestions to Azerbaijan on the communication track, written down suggestions, together with the last example of the Armenian reading of the peace treaty. Now, since then, Azerbaijani side have answered the peace treaty suggestions but it did not yet answer the communication suggestions. Now, very often my colleagues in Azerbaijan, the experts are telling if Armenia doesn't like the trilateral format of negotiations on the communication, why doesn't it leave? Armenia has done already more than that. It has sent to Azerbaijan specific suggestions that were, let's say, very lightly discussed between the leaders of the countries, between Pashinyan and Aliyev, yet in Kazan in last year. So Armenia has sent specific suggestions on that, and we didn't receive the answer yet. So I think it's very important to mention that Armenia already tries to put this conversation on the bilateral track, let's say, in a logic combined with the delimitation demarcation, which is happening on the bilateral principle, and the peace negotiations, which are already also happening on the bilateral scheme, let's say. One more thing about the constitution. There are two versions. So on one side, we can sign the peace treaty, then let's say some political party or someone in Armenia will take it to the Armenian Constitutional Court, and the Armenian Constitutional Court say, no, this peace treaty is not constitutional because it recognizes the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. That's one sort of concern of Azerbaijan. And then there is another concern, which says this can happen anytime in the future. So let's say we sign the peace treaty, we ratify it, then in 10 years when there are different leadership in the country, different sentiments, and again, a party can take this peace treaty to the Constitutional Court and then declare it unconstitutional. Now, as of now, we have very strong evidences that this cannot happen. Let me start with the last concern, which is that in 10 years this can happen. So Armenian legislature works like this. If an international peace treaty is signed, it first is sent to the Constitutional Court, where it is approved by the Constitutional Court, that is well within the line of the Constitution. Only then it is sent to the Parliament for ratification. Additionally, according to the Armenian Constitution, the same document can't be sent to the Constitutional Court twice. So if the document is approved by the Constitutional Court, it can never be sent to the Constitutional Court for the second time. This is very important. This is the answer to that concern in Azerbaijan, that this can happen in 10 years, let's say. Which brings us to the first concern, that it can be done right now by the Constitutional Court. And again, we have a precedent on this. When the charter was approved by the charter of the delimitation demarcation, when it was approved by the Constitutional Court, the references made there have clearly shown that according to the Constitutional Court of Armenia, the Declaration of Independence is not the part of the body of the Constitution itself, and it is not a constitutional text, let's say. It doesn't have a law-binding force, what is written in the Declaration of Independence. It's a historic document, according to the Constitutional Court. So as of now, the Constitutional Court already solved both of the concerns of Azerbaijan. Which brings us to the question, why is this issue still raised? My opinion as an expert is that the constitution is not the problem for Azerbaijan. There is the following calculus by the president of Azerbaijan, that the peace treaty, if signed right now, gives more to Armenia than it does to Azerbaijan. And that's why Azerbaijan is not ready to sign this peace treaty as of now. So what Azerbaijan would need in order to sign the peace treaty is not the constitutional changes. It's additional calories, either from Armenia or from others, which would at least even the benefits of the peace treaty for both countries.
Yes, thank you very much, Arif. There are a couple of important points regarding the Armenian constitution. Before Ahmad takes the floor, I just would like to reflect on a couple of sensibilities that people reflect upon here in Baku. One is that regarding that decision of the, I believe, High Constitutional Court, that was in September or late August, about the charter of the Delimitation and Demarcation Commission. The sensibility here is that that decision was about delimitation and demarcation, about the interstate border, and because the former Nagorno-Karabakh Oblast was inside Azerbaijan, it was Azerbaijani territory, and as an enclave, Therefore, the court's ruling regarding this Delimitation Commission Charter does not address territorial integrity, a concern of Azerbaijan. That's what some of the lawyers have been arguing here. And the second argument about Armenia's constitution's preamble having not been developed and having not eventually entrenched as part of the constitution, because that's what I think the ruling is saying, that yes, that element entailed in the preamble, that 1990 declaration, has never become properly part of the constitution because it has never been followed and improved by the constitutional legislation. Therefore, it does not have a legally binding nature. Azerbaijani concern, as far as I understand, and Ahmed probably could reflect on that, is that Azerbaijanis do not trust Armenians. They're saying that constitutional court decided in this fashion today, and tomorrow it may decide in a different way. Therefore, we need absolute clarity, which would be the removal of that preamble. But you said that constitution is not a big problem. You said something else. You said that Azerbaijan believes that it would give Armenia something, and Azerbaijan wouldn't get enough. I think that's what you said. Ahmed, would be nice to hear your reflections on this subject as well, please.
Yeah, a few words about the Armenian constitution. Yes, like, for example, in 1998, the Armenian constitution adopted a decision saying that Robert Kacharian has been living in Armenia for the last 10 years, since 1988, because Karabakh was, according to that decision, Karabakh was part of Armenia, so that was the court's decision. So that is why from time to time we see that the Armenian court makes decisions that contradicts the previous decisions, but still those kind of decisions are out there. So that's why it creates a lot of ambiguity for Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan want to leave any ambiguity in this process. So that's why Azerbaijan is pushing for the more clear text, the clear, let's say, conditions for signing of this peace deal. And also, Arek mentioned about that Armenia sent certain documents about making the process on logistical connections, bilateral process. I'm not familiar with the document. I believe that the people who are familiar, they can comment on this issue. But what I can say that trying to make the process bilateral, excluding third-party component or any international component, that's also a problem for Azerbaijan, because the implementation of the Zengezur Southern Corridor, it has this, there must be some third party guaranteeing it. We are talking about that, who is going to take who's going to take over that function. So it might not be Russians, it might be somebody else, but also that is why this is also a bit a challenging issue for Azerbaijan.
Yes, indeed. So, Arik, I want to move back to the wider landscape of the peace agenda. Ahmad Alili invented a very nice configuration. It's called 2+2+2. So that, Ahmad, would you be able to explain that 2+2+2, and perhaps we could navigate within that?
It.
You know it, right? It would be nice if the author of the configuration would reflect on that for our viewers to understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, we were discussing, and then we invented the formula 2+2+2, when the two issues are part of the text, and that was a discussion that took place at the beginning of February. So that means that the reality was a bit different. So Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed to have agreed on the text of the peace document in the middle of March, but we were discussing it in the beginning of the February. So two issues back then, they were part of the document, and Armenia and Azerbaijan agree with this two. It's about the presence of the third powers and the court decisions not applying to international courts, mutually. The second two issue, they were not part of the peace document, but they were part of the peace process overall. This was the change of the constitution and the OSCE Minsk group being dissolved. And the two issues in the, between December 2023 and up to the November 2024, there were quite many positive developments, and it seems that when Yerevan they wanted to reach certainly by November. So that's why they were trying to, find the common ground on certain issues to move faster and sign some document prior to the COP29 in Baku. So that is why certain issues were left to the future. And those two issues are the enclaves and Zengezur corridor. Sides agreed that these issues could be discussed in the future, but I'm not sure what's the status of those there's 2 points, because now the situation is much different from November 2024. Will sides, and this is Armenian Prime Minister himself, declared that he wants the topic about logistical connections to be back to the table so that they can discuss this issue. And I believe that Armenia and Azerbaijan now wants to bring, there are some rumors that Azerbaijan wants to bring the discussions on the enclaves back to the table. So we are seeing that is changing. So that formula 2+2+2, that was very relevant in the beginning of the February 2025. By March it changed, but we can create a new formula, of course, the President Aliyev's public reaction on certain issues, and I believe that based on that reaction we can understand Azerbaijan's reaction on that issue, and then we can make clear that where we are with that 2+2+2 formula.
Okay, Arik, let's move into the opening of communication, Article 9. You referred to it. So effectively, as I understand, as many people in this country, I suppose, understand this subject, is that Azerbaijan wants unimpeded, unhindered access, overland passage connecting its mainland with Nakhchivan exclave via Armenia, southern Armenia. Azerbaijan believes that when you're traveling from Azerbaijan to Azerbaijan, from Azerbaijan's mainland to Nakhchivan exclave, it should be as unimpeded as it's humanly possible. And Armenia is saying that, yeah, it could be unimpeded, but it's my sovereign territory. I need to exercise some sovereignty. Azerbaijan is saying, well, I'm going from Azerbaijan to Azerbaijan. Armenia is saying that you may go from Azerbaijan to Azerbaijan, but you're still going through Armenia. Therefore, I need to exercise some control. That's how I understand the crux of this debate when it comes to sovereignty. How does it look like to you?
First, a couple of comments on this 2+2+2 thing, then I will concentrate on the communication issue. First of all, it has to be more frank. I mean, those are not 2+2+2 problems. Those are 2+2+2 maximalistic Azerbaijani demands towards Armenia. Now, the first 2, Armenia unilaterally agreed to and made the concession. Remaining the 2+2, let's say. From those, 2 are actually quite manageable and it's easy to organize. As I said, the Minsk group is not something principal for Armenia, and whenever we know the date and the time and the place of signature of the peace treaty, we can do both. We can dissolve the Minsk group and also sign the peace treaty. Second, regarding to the enclaves, I think there is a very strong exaggeration in the Azerbaijani expert community and also the political community about the meaning of those enclaves for Armenia. If we are not doing as it was planned, and I would remind you that it was planned that we were doing all of the delimitation, demarcation, and leaving the enclaves to the end, if something changes there, I think it's still manageable. Armenia has 1 enclave in Azerbaijan, that is Artsakh. Azerbaijan presumably have 3 enclaves inside of Armenia. If we are doing the exchange of the enclaves, no problem, we can do that too. I don't think it's a big problem after everything that happened between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So that's regarding the enclaves. And then the last 2 points, the communication and the constitution. As I already mentioned, the constitution, according to the Armenian side, it's a non-existing problem. It's a problem well thought and, let's say, imagined by Azerbaijan, but not really a problem to signing the peace treaty and to the full normalization first. Second, all of this, conversation about making it crystal clear, making it signing with the Armenian people, not its prime minister, as a historian, I don't ever remember any country forcing the other one to do a referendum in order to check whether the peace treaty is acceptable for the population or not. Prime Minister of Armenia is elected official. He is the legitimate head of the country. He is the legitimate representative of the country, together with his political party, together with the parliament. So if he signs it, then the Constitutional Court approves it, then the parliament ratifies it. This is the most crystal clear procedure that can actually happen. Anything beyond this is not just maximalistic demand, it's already unlogical demand. Now to the last point, to the communication. You were referring to the so-called Zangezur corridor, which is a term both illegal and unlogical. Why illegal? Because in Armenia we don't have a region called Zangezur, we have the region of Sunik, and the sub-region, the very south of it, is called Meghri. So if you're referring to the road passing through that part of Armenia, you can call it the Meghri route or the Sunik route. And why the word corridor? Because this whole conversation is born from the November 9 announcement, where only one place it was announced as a corridor, it was Lachin corridor. Anything else, you can't see a single word of a corridor there. Now to the wording of unimputed passage. Unimputed, in many places all over the world, there are enclaves that exist, separated from the mainland territory of the country, and there are special regimes of passage of the goods and services to that enclaves from the motherland, let's say, from the mother body of the country. In not a single of those solutions, you will find what Azerbaijan wants. The level of unimputedness, let's say, that Azerbaijan demands is not existent anywhere in the world. If we're again talking about this very frankly, Azerbaijan actually didn't change its demand from the early 2020 and 2021, when in fact the demand was exterritorial corridor. The only thing that changed is the framing, how it's put onto the table. Because at a certain point, Azerbaijan saw that, the words exterritorial corridor is creating a lot of tension around the world. So now, in essence, they are demanding the same thing, while in packaging, they are using a different wording. Obviously, there can be no exterritorial corridor on the territory of Armenia, and if a good or a service have to pass through Armenia, by the way, the comment that it goes from Azerbaijan to Azerbaijan, it sounds good, but it's not checkable. How do we know that these goods or services are not going to Turkey, for example? Because Nakhichevan has a border with Turkey, or vice versa. Yep. They're not coming from Turkey to Azerbaijan. Okay. If Armenia doesn't have any instruments to check this transport and this passage of goods, it's unmanageable. To keep it short, what Armenia suggests right now, if Azerbaijan recognizes the sovereignty of the road, of the passage for Armenia, Armenia is ready to give the easiest possible custom and passport checking procedures existing in the world. This can involve both electronic pre-authorization system, let's say. This can include the security checking procedures that doesn't necessarily require the transport to stop for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or half an hour. It can be done very quickly. It's all negotiable. The technical part of the conversation is negotiable for Armenia.
Thank you, Eric.
The principal part is not. That Azerbaijan should recognize that it's entering the territory of Armenia, and that Armenia has the right to control, secure, and check the goods and services passing through its territory. Just like Armenia is ready to give in return by passing through Nakhichevan, let's say, to Iran, or through mainland Azerbaijan to Russia.
Thank you, Eric. Ahmad, the time of our program is practically over, but after Eric's very elaborate and detailed answer, I think you deserve to respond. Please do respond. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this, and I'm thanking Eric also. There are certain arguments we're repeating to each other during the various meetings, and I believe that we are going to repeat certain arguments for our audience. That there are certain typical Armenian questions to typical, and there are typical Azerbaijan answers to that. And I believe that we have reached a point where, that there are a number of those issues is in race. So there is a very typical questions and typical answers. I would say that there is a no practical need, no functional even need for Armenian checking of Azerbaijani cargo leaving mainland Azerbaijan entering Nakhchivan, because those cargo, those even dangerous materials or people, they are not going to end up in Armenia. They are passing through Armenia. So this is a bit different issue, and I believe that yes, we can agree on this electronic exchange of the documents issue. That's quite a reasonable and a logical way to move forward, because Azerbaijan is doing that with many Central Asian states, China and East European states, because there are so many cargoes that passes through Azerbaijan. They are being sealed in the western provinces of China, and nobody checks them, but Azerbaijan is receiving electronically what is inside of that container, or the like anything in trucks, etc., and that they territory of Azerbaijan, and nobody physically checks what is in that document, because those things, they do not end up in Azerbaijan, so it's very safe to let them through, and they have an economic benefit of that. So that is why that principle could be applied to this logistical chain also. So that is why I believe that the only reason right now, the only reason I can assume, is that Armenia wants to prove that, like, there is a need to prove that its Armenian sovereignty is respected, and I believe that Baku and Yerevan can talk on this. Azerbaijan several times declared that Azerbaijan recognized Armenian over all the land that this the railway link is going to pass. So there is no problem for Baku. But Azerbaijan is against for the physical contact between Armenian law enforcement agencies and Azerbaijani passengers or cargo that's going to pass through this corridor. So this is very important and principal position for Azerbaijan. And of course, nobody in the future should create there should be no danger for this transit link. So that's why Azerbaijan is looking for the guarantee of this corridor. So I'm going to stop there because
thank you.
Because of
the time of our program is over. And the next time we'll continue. Of course, this opening of communication is a fascinating subject. The way Azerbaijan and Armenia interpret that overland passage issue. Armenia is saying that actually term Zangezur corridor is illegal, which was what Arek said. Azerbaijan is saying it's perfectly legal. Well, of course, it's a fascinating subject. We'll carry on this discussion in the fullness of time. I'm so grateful to both of you, Arek and Ahmed. Thank you very much for this very, very interesting conversation.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, these were Arek Kochinyan, president of the Research Center on Security Policy, who joined from Yerevan, Armenia, and Ahmed Aleli, director of the Caucasus Policy Center, who joined from Baku, Azerbaijan. Well, as I said earlier, the text of a draft agreement is ready, but apparently there are some other necessary conditions for the formalization of the document to be established and to be signed. The wider peace agenda between these two nations is far more complex than the actual content of the deal itself. And it looks like that Azerbaijan and Armenia will for some time engage in a tug of war, practicing the art of the possible, the probable, and the desirable on the ways towards ultimate peace. This was Caucasus Now. See you very soon.